This is episode 8 of Objectively Biased. What is going on, everybody? This is Wilder Adams alongside John Tortorelli and River Brown. And today, we're just keeping the episode simple. We are reflecting on some of the biggest moves this past offseason. So basically, the Cat for Randall deal that happened 3 days before training camp. And then also the Paul George signing and reflecting. And we might add a couple teams into the topics if we have more time, but we'll get there when we get there. So what is going on, everybody?
What's going on? How you guys doing?
Yeah, I'm excited that we finally get to talk about the Grizzlies, man. I've been pushing for it on the regular show, pushing it just on Twitter. It's just time we give them some love, man. Because this off season, I just heard a lot of disrespect. Heard a lot of, oh, they're not going to be that good. They're going to be on the same level as the Kings and all these other teams. And it just felt like people forget when Ja, Bane, and Jaren play. They're a pretty good regular season team. So I'm excited to talk about that, though.
We're going to reflect pretty quickly on the offseason, and I think the best place to start is with the first major domino to fall this offseason. So let's go to Paul George to Philadelphia, and I just want to hear Philadelphia sucks right now. Just plain and simple. I believe they're 7-16 right now, really struggling with injuries. So I'll start with John here. So what is your takeaway with the Paul George experiment after a quarter of the season?
My takeaway in the Paul George experiment would be it's incomplete. And ultimately for the 76ers, I think the Paul George trade almost doesn't matter in a sense because when they acquired him, it was the idea of him playing with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid so far this year has hardly played, and in the games where he has, he's not been able to get back to the level that he was at last season. He recently had a sinus fracture in their most recent game. Will now miss more time. So Paul George, to me, was a signing which was supposed to be an upgrade off Tobias Harris, and then you look at their production this year, and Tobias has been more productive, which is something that blows your mind considering Embiid has missed a large chunk of the season. Maxey has been out for a good amount of time. And then you look at Paul George and you expect him to come in and bring that level of scoring and shot creation, but the efficiency has just not been there, nor has the shot making. And I look at the supporting cast. When you fall to 7-17, there's really not that expectation that, or 7-16 is their current record. They're the 12th seed in the Eastern Conference. There's not that expectation with the way that George is playing that he can carry them out of the mud when he is the number one option. So if I had to grade this trade, I wouldn't even want to give it a grade. I'd have to give it a D. I don't think the money that they invested is going to really lead them to a deeper spot in the postseason. And nor do I think Paul George is the floor raiser that can really turn this team's season around with Embiid missing a good amount of time. And I think it could be looked at as one of Philadelphia's worst moves in the way that it will age.
Yeah, it's for me, it's an F because it's just not going to age well. I think, looking at Paul George's shooting percentage or his just his shooting in general. I mean, he's not shooting the three ball well. I think that's been his main point. Like he's not been able to shoot the three ball well. I mean, he's shooting at a clip right now where non-corner he's at 28%, corner threes he's at 30%, but in the mid range, long mids he's at 88. He's at 47%, short mid 35%. In general, just 43%. So he's not been able to get that jumper going. And Paul George is a very jumper reliant, hot or cold type of player. He relies heavily on tough shot making, getting the rhythm type shots, and he just hasn't been that. Of course, you give him some grace, I guess, because he's been banged up this year. Even to start the year, he's been dealing with a nonstop injuries. But this was the splash move of the off season, and with this team being banged up, with Paul George coming in at 34, 35, however old he is, giving him that amount of money, you kind of now look at it like he's so injury prone. You're never going to get that same Paul George. Not even the Paul George you got last year in the regular season, who was really good. You're probably not going to get that ever again. You gave him a shit ton of money. It's just not going to age well. So for me, I throw it an F just because Paul George is declining faster than we thought he would because of the nailing injuries. And this team is just not where it needs to be, where PG is your number one option at this point in his career. He cannot do that. And with Embiid out the lineup, Maxey not being that, playmaker, that upgraded playmaker you want, PG just hasn't been able to get his game going. Not to mention he's also declining.
Yeah, I'll piggyback on you guys on that one. So, John, I agree with you on a lot of points. Same with Riv, and I'll just add to the grade. I'm just going to give it an F minus. F minus. It's been a complete and utter disaster in Philadelphia. And here's some things to consider. So John talked about, okay, Paul George is supposed to complement Joel Embiid, but a big dimension of this is we know Joel Embiid is injury prone. That's never been a secret. You get a guy like Paul George hoping that he can kind of just sail your boat a little bit while Joel Embiid misses 25 games a season, because that's who Joel Embiid is. But Paul George can't even do that anymore. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not even averaging 16 points a game. He's shooting 41% from the field. He has not been transcendent in any way. And when you look at this contract, there's not really any way out of it. It's 4 years, $211 million with a player option in his age 37 season. And when you consider he's supposed to sail the boat when Joel Embiid is out, and now Joel Embiid, he's been injured this year. He's out now with a sinus fracture, I believe, for an extended period of time. It's not even like this year, I believe, is already over. It's really hard historically to come back from 7-16. But even if you just look from a bird's eye point of view, how can you be optimistic this is going to get any better?
Yeah.
Paul George is entering his mid-30s. Joel Embiid, even though he's been injured all year, when he's played, he had that 35-point game the other day, granted, but he hasn't been that MVP caliber player. And when you've seen historically the great ultra-talented bigs of the 2000s with physical problems, a lot of them fizzle out after age 30. Look at what Yao Ming did. Look at what Dwight Howard did. It wouldn't be out of the question to be skeptical if Joel Embiid will ever be the same player again. And when you're this invested into Paul George and Joel Embiid in this experiment, when Rivs, like what Rivs said, Tobias Harris, Paul George, I think John mentioned this too, one of you did, he's not even playing better than Tobias Harris right now. So when you look at the layers of this issue, there's not a lot of ways out, and you're invested into these two franchise players who might not be franchise players. And Jared McCain has been a huge blessing to this team, and Tyrese Maxey's had his ups and downs this season. But because those two are playing so well, there might be a world at the end of the season where you want to lean into that window, but you're stuck with these two on the roster. So there's questions of, is there an anchor that they put on the flexibility of this roster? I feel better about Joel Embiid coming back than Paul George, honestly. But Joel Embiid, we kind of know what this is going to be. He's going to play 50 games a year, and he's probably going to regress. So there's a lot of issues right now. And Philadelphia, with the Paul George move, kind of locked their flexibility.
And B got hurt too. And McCain, I think he got hurt the other night also. So
to add on to that point, when the Sixers added in Paul George, who's one of the best shooters of the last 15 years, with Tyrese Maxey, who became one of the best shooters in the NBA, I think everyone expects them to be one of the best offensive teams in the perimeter. Someone that, or a team that can consistently hit shots, have a dynamic backcourt, and yet they rank 28th in three-point percentage at 32%. They rank 27th in three-point makes and 22nd in three-point attempts. So to add on to that point, just to finalize this part of the topic, Paul George was brought in to kind of be that ceiling raiser, but we all knew there's a lot of blemishes in his game with inconsistent shooting spells in the playoffs, which in past years, dating back to his time in Oklahoma City and even Indiana coming off his leg injury, have held his teams back consistently in 7-game series for a full playoff run. And even in a perfect world where they figure everything out next season, in the playoffs, Paul George's off nights are going to bite this team the same exact way Tobias Harris's did.
And to add to a lot of your points, I think I just want to make a comparison right now. And this team is in a better position this team was, but this is giving me a lot of KG, Paul Pierce, Brooklyn Nets vibes right now in terms of, look, those two played together in Boston. They had that chemistry, but Brooklyn goes all in on those two, hoping they're going to bring a perennial playoff team to complement Darren Williams, right? And they weren't the same players, and injuries might push those two toward that direction. And that's the concerning thing. And the greatest thing that could happen to Philadelphia, in my opinion, this year is if they get a top draft pick. Because if that happens, then they have a legit, valid reason to steer toward a different timeline. Because my trust in Joel Embiid leading a team far at this point of his career, it's pretty miniature. It's pretty small. So that's the worry. Like if they get a Cooper Flagg or someone like that, I think Philadelphia is starting to enter that territory where they need a top pick in this draft as much as anybody.
Absolutely. And if Philly does decide to tank, they need to do so soon because it has to be top 6 protected for them to keep it. Or it's Oklahoma City's. So
Exactly. So I think that's a good way to transition to the next big move. So Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, a Pistons first got sent to Minnesota, and the New York Knicks got Karl Anthony Towns. And we're kind of in that point of the season where you're starting to figure out which team is which. And Minnesota and New York have pretty similar records right now. So I think it's a very interesting comparison to make. And I just want to hear what you guys think about that trade looking back.
I think I wanna add Mikal Bridges into this because I feel like we're talking about New York Cat. Might as well just keep it
Good point.
within that. So to start with New York, you sent 5 firsts, well 5 picks in general. I don't remember if they're all first, but you sent 5 picks in general for Mikal Bridges. To start there, that's been a disaster. He seems like the liability of the starting lineup. Defensively, he's gone. He's not that same all NBA top 3 defensive player of the year candidate player. Like he's not that same guy. Defensively, he seems lost. He has his lapses. He just can't keep up with guys. That screen navigation he used to have, it seems like it's gone. Offensively, he's a hit or miss. He's never been this guy that can, give you advantage creations. He's never been this guy that can go get a bucket on a consistent basis. The 3-point shot is it's all right now. I think the last couple games has been well, but he's so inconsistent right now. It's really hard to say this wasn't a miss because you sent 5 first from him. And his market over the past couple years has felt like it's been that in the media. We had reports saying Memphis would send 3. We had reports about other teams who would send 4. Mikal Bridges seemed like the glue guy that would, complement a championship team like a Derek White for Boston or Drew Holiday for Milwaukee. But he seems like the biggest liability of the starting 5. So that move right there, I'm at a D. I'm honestly at an F because I don't think he'll ever be able to get to that level where it's worth 5 picks for Mikal Bridges. I think for Cat though, just to jump to New York, that for me has been a B plus. I think offensively, what he gives you is a different dynamic. I think his ability, his ability to get to the rim and also space the floor is being more profound in New York because of the respect of the shooters that they have. I think him at the 5, he's been able to hunt mismatches. He's been able to be aggressive on offense. He's been probably their best scorer on the year so far. He's just been that electric. But defensively, what you're getting with Cat at the 5. I think people who are kind of like, they're kind of like shocked at it is odd to me. He was not protected, but he was, Rudy Gobert was able to, hide a lot of his deficiencies on the defensive end. And, Cat is a solid one-on-one defender on the block. So that's kind of his thing. But protecting the rim, he cannot do that. He's kind of flat on his feet, doesn't have that jumping ability, is not good in space. In pick and roll defense, he's pretty abysmal. That's just not his game. So I think that for New York is where I struggle with because offensively, I know New York is going to be great. They're one of the 5 best offenses in basketball. But defensively, where they kind of held their hat on last year, they're kind of going to be maybe a middle of the pack defense until Mitch gets back, but you can't trust Mitch's health. Shifting over to Minnesota real quick, Dante DiVincenzo, when are you going to find your shot? I give it like a C minus, D plus, because I think Julius Randle, I think he's a good player. I'm not going to sit here and act like he's not. He's a really good player. He has his moments. He just seems emotionally sometimes immature sometimes. Sometimes he can, tap out. He can be really frustrated. He can look like he's out the game. Defensively, he doesn't give you all his effort. Offensively, he still feels like he makes silly mistakes. As for Dante, he's a simple 3 and somewhat D type of player. And if he's not hitting that 3 ball, you're kind of like, well, damn, that you're not really giving us too much. So until that jumper starts to fall, it's going to be tough. But Minnesota did this for cap flexibility down the road. So that's a good move in a sense. But I still feel like fresh off of WCF, why not try to give the roster one more go at it? I feel like you made that move a little bit too early, but I understand the flexibility.
James, you want to start with the Timberwolves side?
Yeah, I was actually going to ask if I can piggyback on that real quick. So I appreciate you, John. So, yeah, I agree with a lot of your points on both ends, Riv. I think if we're going to start with Minnesota, because I am the most unapologetically biased Timberwolves fan probably to ever just see the earth. So I'll go straight to that. And I think there's a lot of sides to this. I think from Minnesota, on one hand, they're 13-11 still. They've won 5 of the last 6 games. In those 6 games, they've been by far the best defense in the NBA. The second best defense is 12 points worse than them per 100 possessions. So they've been a juggernaut defensively again. And I think that's a really good sign for them going forward. And Dante DiVincenzo, like you said, when is the guy going to find his shot? We're 24 games into the season, and Minnesota hasn't gotten anything close to what he provided New York last year. And he's playing 25 minutes a game this year, played 29 last year. He doesn't have a lot of excuses. I still believe the shot's going to come around. I do think he's one of those weird players where he's a second half of the season player, just from watching him in New York and Golden State. He's always kind of been in the first part of the season and builds off of it. So I still have optimism that Dante is going to provide some of that. But if he doesn't, it's a net negative trade. I entirely agree. But, Minnesota's defense is still there. Julius Randle, whatever he gives you, it's a bonus because he's on a 1-year contract. And if he can provide you 20 points per game and efficiently, which he has, cool. He needs to defend better. He needs to play within the team better. All those things are true. But Minnesota, like you said, it's about flexibility. The reason why they didn't want to run it back with the Western Conference last year is because Tim Connolly, one of the 5 best basketball of operations in the league, president of basketball operations in the league, he said, I don't believe in this team enough to win a championship. So why would I go all in on this year with the second apron looming again next summer when you have to negotiate with Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Naz Reid, and figure out what you want to do with Cat and Gobert? There was a lot of potential for disaster. And going all in on your franchise's age 23 season when you have all those questions about long-term flexibility, I totally get why he made the trade. So Minnesota, if they get Dante DiVincenzo to play better, it's a net positive trade. Right now, I'm still at like a C+, B- because I still believe Dante can play better, but he hasn't been the player they thought they were getting. And Julius Randle, like I said, whatever they get from him, it's a bonus. There's still a top 4 or 5 team in the Western Conference, which they're not that far off of right now. And with the way they're playing lately, without the offense clicking, that's a good sign. So I'll talk about the New York side more later. I want John to chime in first.
I feel the same exact way as you for Minnesota's front. And I think all the people that are hypercritical of them moving Karl-Anthony Towns weren't looking at the bigger picture. This is a team with ownership in flux, uncertainty as to who is going to be running the team. And because of that, there is not that guarantee that they're going to spend deeply enough into the luxury tax to keep Karl-Anthony Towns. So by moving that contract where he'll be owed over $60 million by his age 34, 35 season, you're now freeing up the cap room to bring back guys who are younger and more versatile. Nickeil Alexander-Walker off the bench. Naz Reid, a 6th Man of the Year finalist. And then in the process, Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo have been major disappointments, more so DiVincenzo after last year's career season. This year's points per game has been cut nearly in half compared to a second half of the season. The 3-point shooting has been down, yes. But when you look at the time of the year, we're just in the middle of December. By the end of the season, the playoffs, I could see Dante DiVincenzo having that spark like Buddy Hield maybe did for the Sixers, where the 3-point shot does come alive. In the playoffs, he can swing 1 or 2 playoff games for you when you need him most. For Julius Randle, I don't see him as a long-term piece for Minnesota because I don't think he fits in quite as well as Cat did. But at the same exact time, it really was a move to open up your depth and adding in more versatility. And that's why they move up in the draft to get guys like Rob Dillingham to bring that shot creation, because they chose Rudy Gobert to be that ceiling raiser opposed to him and Cat together. So for Minnesota, I would give that trade a C because the players haven't played quite well, but I'm not going to go out and say they lost the trade entirely because it wasn't just about the on-court product. It was about their financial room.
I have a question. So just I was thinking about it for like 10 minutes. They move Cat, flexibility, makes sense, right? You want to keep Naz Reid and you want to keep Alexander Walker. They're the younger players; they kind of fit more. Cool, I get that. Your star player, 23, right? And it's about 23. Okay, 23. Star player, 23 years old. So you're not like you want to win, but you're not rushing it. It takes time.
Yeah.
What is if you keep Alexander Walker. You just extended Rudy Gobert, if I'm not mistaken.
You did.
You just did that. You keep Nas Reed. Okay, you let Randall walk. Let's say like next offseason, you let him walk. What's the move that makes you competitive or makes you a WCF team? I don't think a lineup of Ant, DiVincenzo, Nas Reed, and Rudy Gobert is the team that's like, hey, we're going to go in the West and compete for a conference final potential championship. So if you didn't think that roster last year can win it, then what's the roster that can?
I think they're still waiting for that answer. I don't think they need every answer in front of them. I think they looked at it and said, "We know Ant and Cat with no depth or flexibility is going to get the job done." I think that's what they said. And they said, "Look, Nikhil, Naz Reid, when Karl Anthony Towns was hurt last year in 20 games, they were 14-6. They were still the number one defense in the league at that time. And I think even without Cat and even without Randall, there's a lot of reason to believe there's still a legitimate playoff team without that type of player. And then you just kind of like watch the trends. Like, how much does Rob Dillingham develop? And when Rob Dillingham plays, he's effective.
Solid. Yeah, he's solid.
He's like, every time I've watched him, it's like you see a really good player there. It's not people who are watching are like, why isn't he playing? I mean, there's a lot of politics on the Minnesota roster right now. You're still trying to appease Randall a little bit. You're still trying to figure out Dante DiVincenzo. And Nikhil Alexander Walker has been Minnesota's best bench player, period, point blank. He's been excellent all season long. So Minnesota is saying, like, look, we know we have a really good team with these guys without Karl Anthony Towns, and we don't believe Ant and Cat under the second apron is going to get the job done. So let's just stay competitive and see what opens up. Because that's kind of what Boston did a few years ago when they flipped around with the Kyrie Irvings, the Kemba Walkers, the Isaiah Thomases, right? But then they figured out a formula. And over the next couple years, Minnesota, because they have built a pretty deep young core, because they're starting to get their picks back in the future, they'll have more optionality to bring in a player theoretically. Or if Rob Dillingham can become Darius Garland, then that makes a big difference as well. So I just think they're like, we like what we have now, and we'll just see what trends happen. And they believe that these assets will better position them to find that second player 3 or 4 years down the road, if so may be. That's what I think they're thinking.
Yeah, the option right now is the options that they do have, I should say, are very few. And so patience is an important thing where I think choosing to ride out with Cat would have been probably the wrong play because of the fact that oftentimes you look at these championship contenders, they wait until the right move is there and they'll consolidate multiple depth pieces and make that big swing. And I think that's what Minnesota is really trying to do. Now, Riv, you did say before you want to give the Mikal Bridges trade an F because they gave up 5 first-round picks. They invested more than what Mikal's trade value should have been into him. And I strongly disagree because Mikal this season has not been the same player, nor has he lived up to the expectation that the Knicks were placing their investment into him. But there's multiple different things I've seen which give me confidence the trade will work out fine. Maybe they won't get the value that they gave up. Okay, that's fine. They traded 5 firsts for a elite role player. That was an overpay. But that doesn't mean Mikal can't be a really valuable piece of the Knicks. For one, this year when I'm watching the Knicks, he's shooting his best of his entire career from mid-range. And as that third to fourth option offensively, it's been pretty impressive to watch him give you instant offense on the nail where the touch has been there. The three-point shot has slowly gotten back to the point where it was at 34%. And I think it can get better. But there's 2 things to me which I still have confidence in. One, the defense has not been the same. Yeah. But we're talking about Mikal Bridges, a quick 7'1" wingspan, a guy who has a presence on the nail. And I think that even if he's not going to be the same on-ball defender, he's not as cordial when it comes to getting around screens. That is true. He can be a really good second on-ball defender off of OG Anunoby. And then on top of that, when you look at what he's been doing offensively, leading the league in minutes played per game, I think when you get Mitchell Robinson back in the lineup and there's more rim protection and there's less of a burden on these perimeter defenders in New York to stop guys on the ball and they don't have to play as large of a role defensively, they'll have more energy on the offensive end. And all things considered, I think by the second half of this year, Mikal will be a huge asset to this Knicks team. I get right now it hasn't looked very pretty. Things haven't come together quite as well or as fast as you would like. But I would give the Mikal Bridges trade a C-, maybe a D+ if you really want to be critical. I think it's going to age a lot better than you think. And now the value's not there.
You're being too nice. You're being too nice because you got to think if he's the second best defender, you still have to see teams like Boston. You still have who has two players. You have to see teams like Orlando who has two players. You have to see teams like even Cleveland. If this is the Darius Garland we're going to get, that is two players. And we saw Darius Garland against New York. He already torched them up. I think that's no. You have to see teams like Milwaukee who has two players.
Orlando.
Like there's still going to be. I'm probably missing somebody, but there's
Orlando.
still going to be the. Oh, I said Orlando.
Did you?
Yeah, I said Orlando's the second team was the set. Yeah, that's the second
Okay.
team I said. But if I did it, Orlando, another team with two players. So him being the second defender is still like you're still gonna have to guard the top level guy. And listen, we saw Drew Holiday go for what 4 picks when he went to Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And they won a championship. That was, and I'm not saying New York has to do that. That was kind of like all right, you do your thing. But like at the same time, you're looking at it now, and if New York gets bounced in the second round, or if they lose in the first round, and Mikal doesn't play well, you're sitting there looking like, damn, we gave up a lot for this type of guy. And I agree with you, John. I think it's still like obviously we're doing grades right now as of today, and obviously this can definitely change. He can rattle off 40 games and he's a dog, and then I'm looking stupid, but as like it's still like Mikal, you mentioned it. He's played, I don't think he's missed a game since college, maybe even before that. He's played nonstop basketball for 6, 7, 8 years. Not to mention he's played at the highest level in the college. He won a championship. And in the league, he's been to the finals. So he's played for long times of the season, nonstop defense. He went to Brooklyn. I think that's what really hurt Mikal. He went to Brooklyn. They upped his what's the word I want to use? His responsibilities on offense, and that kind of took a toll on him defensively. When that's never been his game. That isn't his game. So I think you have a point there. I'm gonna give him a little bit more grace. I'm gonna change my grade to a D because I feel like you talked me a little bit into it. I think we should give him a little bit more grace as I'm thinking about it.
D for done. But yeah, John, you want to comment on that before I chime in?
I would just like to reinforce, I've been really impressed with his mid-range shot making, and he's leading the NBA right now, minutes played at 38 a game. Defensively, there's still a lot of bright signs off the ball, being able to defend one-on-one. I do think that he's lost maybe some of that, like I said, like you highlighted before, that nimble agility, gain around screens. We saw that against Philadelphia at times. But one-on-one in a playoff setting, I have a lot of faith he can defend Jason Tatum because he has all of those physical tools. Maybe it won't be at the same peak. It won't crescendo the way it did in Phoenix in 2021. But if he's giving you more offensive production and he's a real piece for you in the half-court offense, I think you can find a balance between the two where he can be a low-end number 3 and a contender. And if OG is going to continue playing as well as he has, and offensively he's having, I would argue, a career year. I know the three-point shooting's dropped off a little bit in recent weeks, especially the 2 most recent games, 3 of 18 from deep. Then you can really talk yourself into Mikal helping raise this team ceiling to a point of even higher than it was last year.
Yeah, I think both of you guys are right. And I think Riv made a really good point, and I wanted to talk about this, but Riv beat me to it. And it's that Mikal Bridges has sort of an identity problem right now. Like in Phoenix, he starts to really break out offensively, gets shipped to Brooklyn, and he has that stretch where he's averaging 26 points per game post-trade deadline. And ever since that moment, I've watched a player who didn't play with the same defensive intensity, not the guy who was 1 second in Defensive Player of the Year race. I've never really understood the root of the problem, but I think it's very possible from that moment he was like, hey, I'm a star now. I'm an offensive player. And once you start like not thinking about defense, any player would kind of sag off. We can't say injuries for the guy because he's never missed a game in his career. So for Mikal Bridges, I think there is an identity problem. And to add to another point for Riv, I'm going to add the OG Anunoby trade to this too. So last year, they trade RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley. This year, they trade 5 first-round picks plus Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, plus a Pistons pick, so 6 first-round picks for OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, and Karl Anthony Towns. All those assets they had a year ago are pretty much gone. Is this particular core enough? Is this enough to get the job done? Do they have the defensive and offensive upside to compete with a team like Boston still? With a team like in the Western Conference, Oklahoma City, or peak Nikola Jokic? Can they get the job done against those teams? I'm still very skeptical, and they made obviously by signing Julius Randle and Jalen Brunson out of thin air, they were one of the best teams getting assets on the margins. But in a way, it feels like they got good players for those assets, but they could have gotten a lot more. Or if they waited 1 year, maybe they get a Giannis instead of a Karl Anthony Towns. There's a question for me for New York. Is everything they've done rushed? That's
Mm.
my biggest question right now. Is this core enough? Karl Anthony Towns, everybody all of a sudden loves Karl Anthony Towns for the same reasons they hated him a year ago. I don't know if it's the media bias culture of the NBA, if we are in the honeymoon phase of the Karl Anthony Towns thing, but the Karl Anthony Towns player, who guys like Gilbert Arenas claim is an entirely new man, it's the same exact player I grew up at 11 years old watching. It's the same exact guy for all of his amazing gifts and all of his perfections. Offensively, he's a natural center. There's no doubt about that. He can get to the rim at the center position because he never figured out how to leverage his size advantage on smalls, which is why teams like Denver would consistently throw smalls on Karl Anthony Towns, why Memphis would do that in the playoffs. He wants to use his speed as an advantage, which is why he's great at getting to the rim against centers. That's simple. And he's a good shooter, obviously. Great defensive rebounder. These aren't new things, but everybody's pretending they're new things. And for the negatives, I mean, for my Knicks trade, just to give it a grade, I gave it a B at the start. I'm still going to give it a B because I know Karl Anthony Towns, how gifted he is offensively. But then also, I just think we're learning everything about the good cat. He is a great defensive rebounder playing at the five. But the questions about Karl Anthony Towns still loom for me. When he's in foul trouble, is he going to completely self-sabotage himself? Against Atlanta, he struggled a little more offensively, and I don't think it's a coincidence he was in foul trouble in that game. They lost that game. And in the playoffs, foul trouble has gotten him. And he's a weird tweener player. He's not as good at the four offensively, but he's way better defensively. Offensively, he is way better at the center, but way worse on defense. So it's a Karl Anthony Towns still has to prove in big moments can he be relied upon because that's never been the case. And championships are not won in December. Well, technically they are now because of the in-season tournament. So the Lakers can hang their banner on that. Yeah. But I mean, championships aren't won in December. And I think we are going to learn a lot more about how much Karl Anthony Towns grew in April, maybe May, maybe June if they earn it. But right now, I don't think I've learned anything about Karl Anthony Towns since the trade.
I think it's just reinforcing what Karl Anthony Towns was prior to getting Rudy Gobert. You laid it out perfectly. He's not a new player. He's just playing in a role which really elevates him offensively. And playing next to Rudy Gobert, he sacrificed offensively and benefited defensively. And now this year, it's been a reverse of roles with Mitchell Robinson being at the lineup. Mitch is supposed to be back in January. And assuming things go well on that front, because he's had 2 ankle procedures last year, if Mitchell Robinson's healthy in the playoffs this year, you now have the optionality to toggle between the 2 spots for Cat. And I think that's where you see the best version of him because you're not paying Mitchell Robinson 50 to 60 million the way Minnesota was, which forced them to prioritize Rudy Gobert and what he did so well defensively for 2 years. Or I guess it was just 1.5 years because Cat missed half of their first season together. So I look at the Cat trade. I'm willing to give it a B+. I'm a lot more optimistic with the moves that they made this offseason because the guys that they acquired are all in their not early 20s, late 20s, but Mikal Bridges is 28, OG Anunoby's 27, Cat's 29. These guys are in the middle of their primes. And can New York compete with Denver? I think the answer is if they played in the NBA Finals this year, they can take them to 6 or 7. We saw them earlier last month, came up 145 points to the Nuggets with OG Anunoby having a career high in points. There is a punch they have offensively this year that they did not have last year. But again, they lost part of their identity. The grit, the resolve, that competitive fire that really elevated them and kind of made them better in the sum of their parts a year ago. It's kind of been replaced by that added skill on the offensive end. But I think if they ran it back with that existing core from last year, they were not going to be as good because they were unlikely to keep Isaiah Hartenstein. That was the key piece that when you lost him, it was understandable that the Knicks would pivot to a new style of play with a new group of players. And so far this year, we're seeing them start to adjust and acclimate to this completely new lineup, adding in basically 3 new starters. So I'm pretty optimistic with what they've done, and I want to see the entire year play out before I really make a sweeping declaration that they should have kept their existing guys. I think they made the right move in pivoting. And it's just a matter of, again, Mitchell Robinson is the biggest X factor in this team. If he stays healthy, the Knicks' ceiling is conference finals. They can make a push to the finals. But if Mitchell Robinson's not healthy, I see no way this team gets to the conference finals this year. They could be a first-round exit without Mitchell Robinson because this Eastern Conference is loaded with 4 to 5 teams. Milwaukee's playing better. Orlando is legit and can make it to the second round easily. So the Knicks really are counting on Mitch Rob. And I know I'm going off topic a little bit here, but I wish the Knicks traded Mitch in order to open up the flexibility to re-sign Isaiah Hartenstein last year.
Agreed.
Waiting into free agency for Isaiah Hartenstein to get a huge payday for up to $30 million a year by Oklahoma City held him back for multiple reasons. I know Hart missed the start of the season, but he doesn't have the same injury history and the likelihood of getting re-injured like Mitch. He brings everything Mitchell does defensively while being a better rim protector, and then offensively, he brings a ton of added dimensions, which Mitch isn't going to give you.
Yeah, I'm with
Sorry.
that. And Riv, do you want to add to that?
Just to answer your question, you asked a really important question. You said, is this core enough to get him over the hump? And the hump in the East is a little different than the hump in the West. The hump in the East is Boston. That is the hump. You have to get past Boston because I feel like we've all universally known Boston is in the ECF no matter what. They've even before this team, they've consistently been in the ECF. So the hump is if you beat Boston 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to the finals. We've seen it with the Heat in the past years. You know, if you get over that hump, you can get there. And I do think every team, like just specifically talking about Boston, not Boston, sorry, specifically talking about Orlando, Cleveland, New York, and I can throw the Bucks in there too. Those are the 4 teams I feel like, you know, when John was talking about the East is top heavy loaded, those are the 4 teams he was talking about. Every team provides a different dynamic when they play Boston. I feel like Orlando and Cleveland defensively, I feel like they can bring a ton of trouble for Boston, but offensively for Cleveland, it's a little bit of a tough matchup for the guards. You know, those are bigger, stronger wings. They got 6'4" Drew, 6'4" Derek White, 6'7", 6'10" Tatum Brown. Bit of a tougher matchup for their offense. With Orlando, their offense just isn't that good, but defensively, I think they provide a ton of problems for Boston. With New York, I think offensively, Jalen Brunson could struggle in that matchup. Defensively, Cat will struggle in that matchup. You know, I think for Milwaukee, defensively, they just don't have the guys to guard Boston. So all these teams are a bit of a dimension off when matching up against Boston, but against each other, it's going to be fun, man. I think New York. I am gonna side with John here and say I think this core was the right core to go about, and I think they'll be prepared for the playoffs.
I think with the Karl Anthony Towns thing, because the Knicks are so reliant on their offense as an identity versus a team like Boston, they need Cat to be excellent in that series. They need him to be excellent. And I thought he was making pushes in the right direction in the playoffs last year, but that conference finals was so abysmal. 27% from the field in his first 3 games of that series. That lost Minnesota 2 games. They lost every game the first couple by a couple points. And if Karl Anthony Towns is 5 to 10% better, they might win that series. Like genuinely, they might have won that series. And I think that was a part of why Tim Connolly said, okay, let's get Cat out of here. Because they were like, are we really going to go all in on a tandem in which Karl Anthony Towns consistently doesn't show up in the biggest moments offensively in the playoffs? They need Cat to show up, and we will see what Karl Anthony Towns they get against a team like Boston because he is more needed in that series than he's ever been in his career.
Absolutely. And playing against that many versatile wings in the perimeter, like Tatum, Brown, even Drew Holiday, who can switch onto him, I think you could see him kind of revert back to some of those old habits.
Yep, and I think that's a good way to end that topic. And before we head out, I think Riv's
got
been
time.
begging for this topic for
Oh,
a
yeah, we
minute
do.
now, man. We've heard it for like 4 episodes, but the 18-8 Memphis Grizzlies firmly at number 2 in the West right now. You can see Riv right now hyped up. So Riv, I'll gift you the ability to start this topic. So talk about Memphis right now, man. What you feeling?
Listen, me and John, we don't get along. Let me start by saying that. I hate him. I hate him with
I hate you. I
every
hate you
bone
with
in
a
my
burning
body.
passion.
But one thing we do get along with is certain NBA teams. In Memphis, I gotta admit, me and John have been here. These are one of our teams we really fall in love with. Memphis, they've turned a corner this year. And of course it's really early, but I feel like the signs are there. You can see the change in what they're doing. I mean, offensively, they're just on a different level right now. And they've struggled previous years with their half court offense. They didn't have the proper shooting, the proper spacing. Let me start with this guy. Jaren Jackson has been
Career.
their most consistent. I don't want to say their best because when Ja's on the floor, Ja. But he's been their most consistent player and been their most important player because he holds up the defensive side of the ball for them while giving them 20 plus points a game offensively. And he's been efficient. And his touch on the ball and his floaters, his ability to bring up the ball, go left hand to right hand. He has a little spin move. He can attack mismatches. He can get into the post. He has the hook shot. He's just improved on his game. Not to mention, he has the little come down the court, you hit him with a pass, pull up three now. That's a little bit in transition. He's getting to that game. So Jaren Jackson offensively, he's improved. And this team it's just been riding on that because Ja, Bane, Marcus Smart, they've missed time, but they've been riding on the youth that they have. I mean, Jay Huff is not, he's probably like 27, 28, but he's youthful in the sense of he's only played about 2-3 seasons in the NBA. He's given them much needed rim protection. He's given them spacing. Sayati Adama has been arguably one of the best six mans in the league, giving them a different dynamic on offense. Then you have Scottie Pippen Jr., who comes into the game, creates a different pace, kind of an upgraded Tyus Jones in the sense of he can play defense. He can get to the rim. He's a really good playmaker. Then Jalen Wells possibly could win Rookie of the Year because of how good he's been on the catch and shoot, how good he's been as a gritty defender. You have, and then this is they're 18-8, 17-8, whatever they are.
18-8.
And they're missing three key starters. Zach Edey hasn't played in a while. Gigi Jackson hasn't come back yet. Vince Williams is probably the most important part of these three guys because he's
played 3 games.
Yeah, he's an elite defender. He's also a guy who can, hit the three ball. So I think this team is just, it's showing you something different. And, like I was looking at their numbers. They're the number one team in transition. I think they've built into this their identity. They're number 5 in points per possession. They're 1 in points added per 100 possessions. Their frequency is at the top of the league. They're number 5 in points per play. Like, they're just one of the best transition teams, and they've kind of leaned into that identity, especially when you have Scottie Pippen Jr., you have John Morant out there. You want to run. You want to get these guys in space. You want to get the lob threat going because you have Aldama, you have Jarrett, you have Jay Huff, who all can go in there, catch a lob. Even Brandon Clark, a guy who seemingly has been great for them. Yeah, he's been just great for them in that 4 or 5 role, sometimes even the 3. Sometimes they go 3 bigs, and they're just so versatile in their lineups and their half court offense. I mean,
best in the gyre.
Yeah, that's right now their points per 100 possessions. They're ranked 5th with 118.0. And I think that leans into their offensive rebounding because they have, they're 4th in offensive rebounding percentage, and they have guys that attack the glass. Will Memphis win a championship? Probably not, right? Will Memphis be a competitive team in the regular season? 1,000% they already are. Will they make a push in the playoffs? I don't know. We have to see if this all translate. But the point I make and the point why I want to talk about Memphis, because this is a team that just had a lottery pick. Like, literally last year, this is a team that's missed John Morant, missed Desmond Bane. Desmond Bane hasn't really even got it going this year. This is a team that's kind of been swept under the rug because last year they were injured, they were banged up, and they were kind of just forgotten about. And now to just bounce back so fast, be 18-8, top of the West. I mean, you got to give it some sense of credit. Will it last? I think it will. We can see teams have a skid, teams go through their motions, but Taylor Jenkins has these guys playing at an amazing rate. And John Morant is just, his ability to his upgrade as a playmaker and as a passer has been so far-fetched. I mean, he's just been doing a great job. So shout out to Memphis. They've been amazing to watch. I've locked into every single game, and I'm excited to see their progress.
Absolutely. Last year was a gap year for the Grizzlies, a step back to take a step forward. And I firmly believe that from the time that Ja was suspended and Steven Adams was out for the entire year, that they needed to have a down year where they can come back with more depth. And when I look at the Grizzlies rotation, this is the first NBA team I've seen in my time as an NBA fan, which has 15 rotation players. Among them, 14 are all in their 20s. Riv highlighted the play of not only Santi Aldama and Scottie Pippen Jr., but then the rookies as well. But you go down the list, there's so many different NBA journeymen that have come in, like a Jay Huff, and been uber productive in reserve roles. And it opens up a variety of questions. But primarily, the difference between this year's Grizzlies and past years like 2023 is that this is the best offense they've had in the John Morant era. And it's not because Desmond Bane is scorching hot from three. In fact, he was hurt earlier in this year with no oblique injury. And Desmond Bane, one of the NBA's most consistent shooters, is hitting just 32% of his threes.
Yep.
Despite that, they rank first in points per game at 122. Why? Jaren Jackson is realizing his full potential. His touch offensively has been impressive, so is his ball handling. And you're seeing him kind of grow into that frame and that high center of gravity and really evolve into a shot creator who defensively will still give you that value that every team desires in the postseason. And having that second unit where they're all in their early 20s and they all give you a different punch of playmaking, shot creation, and defensive versatility opens that question of whether or not this team will consolidate some of that depth and youth to maybe upgrade off of a veteran like Marcus Smart, who has not lived up to the billing and the investment they poured into him. So the Grizzlies have a lot of untapped potential. And while the focus is on Oklahoma City with their immense draft capital, I don't see why Memphis can't climb into the top three, win one or two playoff series, and then they continue to scale up on this lineup because when Gigi Jackson and Vince Williams come back, you will need to open playing time. Those are two locked in, set in stone, must have rotation players who need playing time to develop. And it's an amazing problem to have that there's a litany of rotation players like Jake LaRavia, Marcus Smart, Luke Kennard, Brendan Clark, Jay Huff, even John Conchar Riv. You showed him like a couple of shows ago. He can still be a guy who doesn't
Haven't
kill
seen him
you.
in a while.
He can still be a guy that, well, they've got 14 rotation players.
He's
You
in
put
one of
John
them.
Conchar in, he'll just be a warm body. And that's something that every team could use the back end of the rotation. So Memphis is getting a lot out of this youth. And I think when John Morant and Desmond Bane start to find a rhythm in the second half of this year, their offense can stay in the top five. They're first in pace. They've got top 10 defense. And like Riv said, Zach Edey can be a real X factor. He's only played in 14 games. So there's a lot of positives. I think this team could easily have their best season in the Ja era, and 50 plus wins is not out of the question whatsoever.
I'm just upset among all the great rotation players that John mentioned, he never mentioned Kawamura. That upsets me a little bit, man. You saw that step back the other day? Oh,
Yeah,
man, that was fire. Or that like little turnaround mid-range jumper, man. He's like my new favorite player. But I'll say this. I agree with all of what you guys said. I'll just put it like this. The Memphis Grizzlies are rediscovered. It's that simple for me. Like John highlighted, last year's down year in a lot of ways was a really good thing for the Grizzlies because I thought for Ja's end, it was a great way to teach him how to grow up. I mean, it felt like a couple years ago, a dude like Ja Morant felt like he was on the top of the world and he can do whatever he wanted. And it was the first time he was a superstar. He was a nobody prospect turned into number 2 overall pick. So a lot was coming at him very quickly. And there were influence questions with Ja. And I think last year really gave him a chance to just sit back, kind of taste his own crow a little bit, right? And just I see a way more grounded and grown up Ja Morant this year with the way he plays, with the way he carries himself. And that's great. And a part of what screwed Memphis over a couple years ago is when they lost one of the deepest benches in the NBA. You lose guys like Kyle Anderson, DeAnthony Melton. You can go down a list. And now Tyus Jones. And now they replace Tyus Jones with Scottie Pippen Jr. You replace Dillon Brooks, even though this guy is struggling offensively, you replace Dillon Brooks with Marcus Smart. You figure out the big man rotation again. Zach Edey is playing solid when he plays, right? Gosh, why am I forgetting his name?
Jay Huff
Loyola
is
Chicago. Loyola Chicago, first round pick. What's his name again? Sorry.
Jalen Wells.
No.
He was
Their center. Why am I forgetting his name?
Jay Huff.
Other guy. The
Brandon Clark?
force-facing six-man of the year candidate. What?
Santi Aldama.
Aldama. I
Oh,
have
there you
no
go.
idea
Didn't
why
know
I
he went to
forgot his
Loyola.
name.
Oh, yeah, he did. I don't know how I
Yeah,
didn't
he's
immediately
having a
put it
career
together.
year. He's been excellent offensively. So they're getting a lot of guys rediscovered. And what makes me really believe in this team, they're one of the 5 teams in the NBA, top 10 on offense, top 10 on defense. They're complete. They're playing better offensively. And there's a lot of meat on the bone still. Like you guys mentioned, Desmond Bane hasn't played much, or he hasn't played well very often. You have guys like Vince Williams, Gigi Jackson, who haven't played. And I think there's going to be some questions about who plays. Do they have too much talent? It sounds like a stupid question, but that's a legitimate question sometimes. So they'll have to answer those questions. But Memphis has reestablished themselves as a team that's consistently top 2 in the West when healthy. And they've replaced their bench, which was really critical a couple years ago, with the number 1 scoring bench in the NBA, with guys who sort of replace and even upgrade the identity they've had. So I think this is the most complete Memphis team we've seen. And they'll position themselves, whether they make a playoff run or not, they have a lot of flexibility, a lot of answers because they've developed so many good players. Now they can make a case. If they want to make a trade for a superstar, they'll be in front in line to do it. So I think Memphis has reestablished themselves as one of the best situations. And last thing, Ja Morant playing 29 minutes a game is excellent because that's not the type of guy who can withstand physically playing 35 minutes a game because we've seen it. He's never played more than 67 games in his career. So I think a fresher Ja Morant will only help them in the postseason. So a lot of reasons to love what Memphis is doing.
Amazing point. When you have the deepest team, arguably in the NBA, and your guys aren't playing as much minutes, they're less likely to get injured. And that's important for their top 3 players who have all had nagging injuries the last couple of years.
Talk. Memphis down, baby.
Memphis down, man. And honestly, as a Minnesota fan, I still hate them. So we'll deal with you in April, guys. We'll deal with you in April. I would love to play Memphis in the playoffs.
Hey, part 2 would probably be fire. Honestly,
Fire.
Yeah, part 2.
Part 1 was a great series.
Julius
part
Randle
1 was
revenge
amazing.
arc.
Oh.
Oh man, if Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle just have a crazy playoff series, I am not shutting up on this podcast. As simple as that. And then I'll start like fantasizing over the Detroit Pistons pick because they look like they have a future. So we'll revisit the Karl Anthony Towns trade, but that is going to conclude episode 8 of Objectively Biased. We made some good timing today, fellas. Really good timing. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Time.
Next week we'll be back once again, and we appreciate the support, and we'll see you next week.